Listen to this podcast now on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Why is the middle class shrinking? Why are people facing an affordability crisis while marginalized individuals called informals grow in numbers? Join me as I travel the world, speaking with people living in invisibility, the leaders working to solve it, and uncovering the hard truths shaping our economy and daily reality.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform.
This is the Cats Roundtable with John Catsimatidis.
Everywhere around the world, they come to America. Every time that flag's unfurled, they come to America.
Good morning from New York. This is the Cats Roundtable. John Catsimatidis here. Paul Zuber calling in from Albany. What's going on in the business community from upstate New York? Steve Cates, otherwise known as Dr. Sky. Jerry Schaffenberger from New Jersey, and more news about going on in New Jersey. Paul Danachek from the New Jersey Conservative GOP. John Terrett on the economy. Nicole Mariatakis from Staten Island, but representing all of New York City. Governor David Paterson. Jesse Arms, Senior Vice President of the Manhattan Institute, Senator George Borrello, and let's start off with Steve Phillip, Chief Executive Officer of the New York City Partnership. With us today is Stephen Phillip, and he's the new president and CEO of the New York City Partnership. Steve, are you getting your feet wet?
Yeah, it's been going well, although it's a trial by fire, getting thrown into the deep end here, however you want to frame it. It's been interesting just because of the tax environment and some of the conversation coming out of City Hall.
So there's music playing in Washington, there's music playing in Albany, and there's music playing at City Hall, and there's different music playing at City Council. So can you sort it out for us?
Yeah, let me start by saying that I think all of those agree we have a very, very fragile economy. You see indicators on the national front, and you see indicators certainly in New York City. And you could say that last year's economic data being kind of touch and go was a result of maybe a mayoral election with a socialist mayor, maybe it was tariffs, maybe it was AI, maybe it was all of it. But the first couple months of this year has continued with the up and downs and the concerns. So we have a city hall that's now proposed, 4 types of taxes in 2 months. We've had a income tax at $500,000. We've had an income tax at $1 million. We've had a real estate tax, and we've had a corporate tax. That type of rhetoric scares away investment, as you know, and we're doing our best to push back on it. But, some of the socialists involved here, seem to think that taxes is the only solution.
Well, look, I'm in a position where it doesn't bother me, but a lot of upper middle class people, I think the problem is they may leave.
I think that's true. I think that, you don't need a lot of the super wealthy people to leave to have a huge impact on the budget. So when people say, oh, everybody's going to stay, or they're bluffing, all you need is a handful. And the reality is at the top bracket, you're more than 55% of your income goes towards the government. So basically the government's the majority partner without doing the majority of the work. And to most successful people, they would say that's a formula that doesn't work. What you said about people that make $500,000 or $250,000, it's very, very hard to raise a family in New York City. There's no question about the affordability crisis, but you need to grow paychecks and grow jobs in order to create better opportunities. If you squeeze people out and the budget continues to get constrained, then you're going to see more people leaving, and the spiral downward will only continue.
You also represent all the major banks in New York, and
Yep.
And they have, how many employees they have?
We have 800,000 employees, and the reality is that when you talk to these CEOs, there's several of them that are actively in conversations with regards to, growing in Texas. Several of them have said non-publicly that they're not going to add any new jobs in New York. And this is all byproduct of kind of the rhetoric. People like to invest where there's stability, when they can predict what's going to happen. It doesn't need to be a perfect environment, but having some visibility into what's going to happen or what may happen is important. Now, when you have people talking about income taxes and then lower income taxes and property taxes and corporate taxes. It creates uncertainty, and people won't invest, which is very dangerous for New York.
We can build 99 apartments in New York City, and once you go above 99, it becomes unfeasible. So, I'm scratching my head what we should do. Maybe we should leave the land empty and worry about it later.
I was the mayor of Jersey City for 12 years, and you look across the river and you'll see those big buildings. We're building 60 stories, 70 stories. And the reason that we build like that, and I'll point as a side note that during the campaign, candidate Mamdani used to talk about Jersey City and Tokyo as models for growth. And the reason we were able to build it is because we prioritized housing growth. And we said, you know what, the community givebacks are important. Union jobs, of course, are important. Some affordable are important. But, business people like yourself make decisions based on math. And at some point, those projects can't support all of those things. And so you got to make choices. If your objective is to grow housing, that needs to be the majority of what you push for. And other things might have to go by the wayside that might be sounding good politically, but ultimately are just unaffordable. And those are sometimes things that sound good, like community givebacks or 100% union labor. If the goal is building housing, we need to prioritize building housing. And what you just said on 99 units versus 100 units is a huge problem in New York City, that developers find it economically advantageous to build 99 units because they're not beholden to all these other rules around union labor and different sort of obligations. It's a problem. It's a problem.
Do you have good communications with City Hall, with the City Council in Albany?
Yes. Well, all three, yes. Are
they listening? Do they understand the problems?
I think the City Council, the Speaker, has been great. She understands it. She's coming to the partnership to speak to a huge group of CEOs on Monday, as a matter of fact. And, the governor's been strong. City Hall has a different philosophy as it relates to taxes. So we just got to continue to be public and educate and push the narrative.
Steve Phillip, President, CEO of the New York City Partnership, thank you for the update. And we'll talk again real soon, and let's hope for progress.
Thank you, Don.
The Cats Roundtable.
With us today is Congresswoman Nicole Maliotakis, and she had a great week. Nicole, tell us about it.
Yeah, look, the Supreme Court did the right thing, and they stopped our maps from being racially gerrymandered, which is unconstitutional according to federal law. And we're glad that they stepped in, because this was a frivolous attempt, a meritless attempt by the Democrats to change our map, to tilt the scale, to give themselves an advantage. And they tried to claim that it was about race, when really it was about politics and trying to steal this seat from the people of Staten Island and Brooklyn. And I've always said, whether I serve another term should be up to the people of Staten Island and Brooklyn. It should not be up to these map makers that are politically connected or Democrat high-powered attorneys working to, set up a system where only the Democrat can win an election. And as you know, John, my district is the only district that is competitive in the city of New York. It was represented by a Democrat until I defeated that incumbent in 2020. And that was the people's choice. And this is a good win for the people of Staten Island and southern Brooklyn, who will now be able to go to the ballot box and select the person of their choice, not have the Democrat Party jam somebody down their throats that they did not elect. And they were trying to tilt, again, the scale to move this district into Manhattan to achieve that, and we were able to defeat them.
It's good that New York City has at least one Republican representing it, and thank you so much for everything you do.
And this is the third time, John, that we've had to fight them in court to protect this district map. In 2022, they tried to egregiously gerrymander us. We sued back then, and they threw out the entire state map, and it was redrawn by an independent master appointed by the court. In 2024, we had this battle again, and then finally the Democrats chose to not change the map from the independently drawn maps. So we were successful there. And then here we had this third legal fight. But the reality is, like I said, most competitive district, the only competitive district in the city of New York. And a matter of fact, Democrats have a double-digit voter registration advantage. So they should try actually putting forward good policies and winning on merit instead of trying to change the line to rig the system so they can try to get elected without having any competition.
Now, what else is on your mind on a Sunday morning?
Well, obviously, this week there was a court ruling that we were unhappy with, which was the one from the federal court saying that President Trump could not stop congestion pricing. I believe otherwise, and this decision is going to be appealed. As you know, President Trump, within his first 30 days, rescinded the approval Joe Biden gave New York City to implement that congestion tax. And they never did a full and thorough economic impact statement required by federal law. And so there's multiple lawsuits, but I received word this week that the administration is going to appeal that decision. So this fight is not over, and we're going to continue to fight for the hardworking, tax-paying commuters who shouldn't have to pay another fee to enter the city center in the city in which they live. And in addition to that, on Staten Island, I'm joining with my colleagues to fight the mayor's attempts to place a new shelter in the South Shore of Staten Island. We were always skeptical, but we were told that this was going to be a hotel. Obviously, this is the reason why we oppose these hotels popping up in our community, because they tell us one thing and then they turn it into a shelter. So they're closing a shelter in Manhattan and then wanting to open a shelter on Staten Island. That makes zero sense. And so we're going to fight this. I'm working with Frank Morano and my other colleagues, Mike Riley, Tanusis, those who represent that area on the South Shore, to push back on the city, because the city did not get community input here. That has to be part of the conversation. In fact, there was a state law that said that they needed to do that. So they're trying to really hurt, again, neighborhoods and communities and the quality of life once again. And that's not a surprise coming from this mayor, who also, by the way, wants to increase property taxes, which is another fight we have. John, you know, on the federal level, we worked very closely with President Trump to deliver SALT relief so New Yorkers could write off their local, state, and property taxes. And here comes the mayor now trying to raise property taxes and take more money from hardworking New Yorkers and making it less affordable to live in New York City.
Well, Nicole Mayotakis, thank you so much for everything you do for all in New York City. Let's hope common sense prevails.
Yes. Well, thank you, John, for having me on as always, and we appreciate you getting the truth out there.
Thank you for listening to the Cats Roundtable. We'll be right back right after this break. Welcome back to the Cats Roundtable. With us today is Governor David Paterson. Well, Governor Paterson, what's on your mind this Sunday morning?
Well, it's a very interesting week, John, particularly on Thursday, when Kristi Noem, who's the Homeland Security Director, was relieved of command in place of Markwayne Mullin, who is a Republican senator from Oklahoma City. Mullin met with the media right after the announcement was made, and he said that he wants to collaborate with Democrats more than has been so in the past, which is a good sign for a new leader. Noem really made her bed and then didn't sleep in it earlier in the week, John, when she was asked if she would apologize to the families of the two people who were slain in Minneapolis, and she refused to do it. Now, the right thing to do in that position would have been to have said, yes, I'm really sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that I said that they were terrorists. A lot of things were going quickly at that time, and when I got to review it, I realized I made a mistake. And that is the biggest mistake, in my opinion, that elected officials make. They box themselves into a corner thinking that they can't tell the truth when the truth would have been the best way out. Now, there was a growing desire for her to leave, apparently, not just from Democrats, but from Republicans as well. But now President Trump has demonstrated that this is the first removal of a cabinet member by President Trump in his second term. He had removed 7 cabinet officers by this time in his first term. So, you know, with the distinct advantage of hindsight, he can look back and make decisions when he wants to. He was obviously talking to a few people in a couple of days before making this move on Thursday. And I think that it just demonstrates, not just with him, but really with presidents, that given a little time and settling into the position, you start to get better results.
I think you're right. My original discussion with the president before he became president was the fact is let's get rid of all the major criminals. And I think that's the old 80-20 rule. 80% of the people would say, yeah, you're right. And I would say any sane person, whether they're Democrat, Republicans, or independents, will say, yes, that's the correct thing to do. But I think Kristi Noem went a little bit overboard and started getting rid of all illegal migrants, even though some of them might have been married to American citizens, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, that's exactly what I think happened. And she was pretty audacious. She went into different cities and served subpoenas, which is not what the head of the agency is supposed to do. And then, she was pretty antagonistic toward Republican Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana when he was questioning her about a $200 million budget that she had come up with to do advertising about how the public can help Homeland Security. And he asked her directly, did President Trump sign off about it? And she said yes. And within 2 hours, President Trump heard about it. He hit the ceiling because apparently he did not sign off about it. So that's, when inexperience leads to more inexperience. Now there's a nice little situation. The new Homeland Security director, the senator from Oklahoma, he said that he wants to talk with more people on the other side of the aisle and get the idea of what's the best way to come in to their territories. And Tom Holman demonstrated. He came went into Minnesota, and he cleaned that place up in a week and a half. I mean, nobody ever did anything like that in this country, maybe since Wyatt Earp. And I think it's just...
I knew that. I didn't know that guy. I'll check with Cindy Adams if she knew him personally.
Oh, why? She's an old friend of his. But I think that it was really a good week for the White House. I'm a Democrat, and I don't agree with maybe 70% of the things they say, but the way they ushered her out and brought somebody in was, I thought, masterful.
Well, Governor David Paterson, thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your common sense. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Great.
The Cats Roundtable.
Let's go to Chautauqua County. And Senator George Borrello, what's going on in western New York and upstate New York?
Well, thank you very much. So we're hearing from the governor and from many people in the state legislature that we're going to have an on-time budget. Our budgets have been plagued by not being timely the last several years. In fact, Governor Hochul has yet to have an on-time budget since she has been governor. However, I'm a little skeptical of that, John. Right now, we are seeing a setup between the governor, who is understanding that the radical climate policy and the disjointed energy policy that New York has right now is on a collision course with the people of New York State, and she understands that. She's had her surrogates out there talking about the fact that we do need reliable baseload energy. We need reliable forms of energy like natural gas and propane and nuclear. Meanwhile, my Democrat colleagues are saying we want nothing but wind and solar. And we've seen the impact of that. So the governor is in this dangerous game of energy musical chairs. We keep taking seats away, keep taking energy away, and she's going to be the one left without that seat if she's not careful. So I think what's going to happen in this budget now is we are going to set up a battle essentially between the governor and her desperation to get reelected, who realizes that we have to have energy, and my Democrat colleagues who want to live in this fantasy world that they're going to somehow be able to keep the lights on in New York State with just wind and solar. So I think that's the battle that could end up, once again, pushing our budget out and making it a late state budget again.
What parts of the state budget did you worry most about? By the way, I made a mistake last week that 260 and 127 is $400 billion, not $300 billion.
Yeah. Well, that's the part that bothers me, John, that here we are. The governor proposed another record-breaking budget, $260 billion that she has proposed, And then I know for a fact that my Democrat colleagues are going to up that number even further. They're going to up the ante. They like to play with the numbers. You and I are business people. You have to make accurate predictions as to what you think your revenue is going to be based on what you know. But instead, they kind of throw that out the door in the state legislature and make up the numbers themselves. And unfortunately, that never really works out. And that's the process that we're in right now. We will see what are referred to as the one-house budgets next week. This is where the New York State Senate and the New York State Assembly put out their versions of the budget. And these are documents that are essentially where we're going to see a lot of policy in those budgets. We're going to see them essentially push back against the governor's canceling of the all-electric building mandate. Well, not canceling, but actually just delaying it, at least to get it through the next election. We're going to see them double down on things like higher energy prices. The Democrats passed a bill that would essentially prohibit propane delivery companies from actually line iteming the cost of the cap and tax, the cost of the taxes and the climate laws, how that impacts people's cost of propane. And this is the case. My Democrat colleagues like to say, green energy is cheaper and it's so much cheaper per kilowatt hour. But meanwhile, they have prohibited utility companies and other companies that are impacted negatively by the cost of that climate law from actually line iteming it on our bill. So we, the people of New York State, could actually see how much every month it costs us to comply with the Democrats' radical climate policy.
I had dinner with Governor Pataki the other night, and he's got a farm upstate, and his normal bill was $500 a month or something like that, or $800 a month. All of a sudden, last month, he got a bill for $5,000.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's happening. And again, my Democrat colleagues want to blame greedy corporations, and they want to talk about other things that are unrelated to the truth. The truth is, all of the infrastructure that it costs, that it takes to hook up all of these wind and solar projects around upstate New York, all that expensive infrastructure to hook it into the grid is paid for by the ratepayers. And it's hidden in the delivery charges. And I saw essentially that the cost of the climate mandate, for every dollar that you pay in an electric bill, 38 cents of it is just to cover the cost of New York State Democrats' climate policies.
I wouldn't mind so much if those climate goals were really proficient. But somebody conned those people, and the people that signed on to those climate goals were not smart enough to realize they were being conned.
These folks are not in the energy business. They're in the government subsidy business, and they are con artists. All these wind and solar folks that show up at a farmer's door, they're paying for it with our taxpayer dollars. There's no profit in these industrial scale wind and solar projects. The only profit comes from taxpayer subsidies. That's how they're making profit. And those folks that are out there, the climate alarmists, they are the useful idiots for these con artists that include, by the way, the enemies of the United States, like China, that is profiting hugely off of these ridiculous climate goals here in New York and other blue states. They are the ones profiting at our expense. So essentially, we are taking our taxpayer dollars, and in the end, it's ending up in the pockets of the Chinese Communist Party in places like the Congo, where they use slave labor and child labor to mine the rare earth materials that go into these wind and solar materials. This is what it has become. It is essentially laundering taxpayer money into the hands of the enemies of the United States with the useful idiots of the climate alarmists that are supporting it.
Senator George Borrello, thank you so much for calling in this Sunday morning.
Thank you.
With us today is Paul Zuber, Senior Vice President of Business Council of New York State. Are we going to be able to stay in business in New York State and New York City?
John, I don't know, because, there's this interesting fight going on in Albany because over the climate law. And just recently, there was a group of, I believe it's 23 New York State senators, informed the governor that they refused to make any changes to the climate law. And, to me, this is the perfect example of what frustrates the people out there, the average everyday person, because the governor's own agency came out with a report, and they asked the agency, okay, look at how much this climate law is going to cost us now that the world's changed and everything's changed. And what they said was, you can expect gasoline on top of what you're paying for gas at the pump to go up an additional $2.23 per gallon. So on top of what you're paying, you're going to pay additional $2.23. If you live upstate and you use oil or gas, your costs are going to exceed $4,000 a year in extra costs. And if you're in New York City and you use natural gas, it's going to exceed $2,300 a year in extra costs. And this is a perfect example to me of, okay, the law doesn't work. So what's wrong with going back and fixing it to make it work for the everyday person? Because if you're telling the everyday person that they're now going to have to pay on top of what they're paying an extra $2.23 a gallon, think about it. If you own a small car and the small car takes 12 gallons of gas, that means you're paying in excess of $26 extra on top of what is already costing you to fill your car. If you have a mid-sized car and it does 16 gallons, you're paying an extra over $35. If you fill your car up once a week, which most people fill it up twice a week, it's costing you an extra over $107 more if you have a small car and over $142 more if you have a mid-sized car. So how are you helping the working class New Yorkers? How are you helping them if you're unwilling to fix a law that the governor's own agency says is going to cost you this much more to the average consumer? It really kind of is upsetting to me that we don't look at things in terms of what the average person has to do and in terms of what they have to go through to get through life. And, this is a perfect example. I'm just beside myself that people aren't saying, okay, we need to fix it. No one's saying to completely scrap it. But what we're saying is there's other forms of energy like clean natural gas, nuclear, other things that you need to look at. You need to kind of look at it with a above all kind of a strategy and stop going down this insane path.
Right now, we're limited that we could only build apartment houses with 99 apartments. Otherwise, the penalties and the costs are prohibitive. So what you're doing is you're making us saying, well, let's not do anything and put the land in inventory and come back to it someday.
It's not working, right? So it's okay. You passed a bill and it didn't work, right? So fix it, right? Because to your point, and we're hearing it a lot from developers, right? They build it up to 99 and then they're done, right? But meanwhile, everybody's clamoring, well, why isn't there more housing? Why isn't there more this? Right? But you've created a situation where you're forcing people to do the complete opposite of what you want them to do. Okay, then fix it.
I don't understand. Thing is, with the Mayor Mondani, who had a meeting with President Trump, and President Trump will give him unlimited amount of money for affordable housing, but I guess he has to cooperate with President Trump. So it's up to the two of them to do the right thing for everybody.
And that's where, I always think about it with my kids, right? Eventually when anybody has kids, you just tell them when they break something or do something, just fix it, right? Just fix it, right? You want your kids to use common sense. And so, you talked about with the 99, apartments that you're limiting, like what I'm talking about with the climate law, we could go on and on and on and on about things that are done, and particularly things that were done during the COVID pandemic that just don't work anymore. And everybody is just so stuck in the mud, they don't want to take blame for it. They're worried about what people – just fix it. I think that's all the American public wants. They just want you to fix it. Hopefully the legislature will work with the governor and fix the climate law. I mean, to her credit, she's taken a lot of heat from the environmental movement for wanting to fix it. But, look, I give her credit for raising her hand and saying, oops, this isn't working, so let's move on and try to find a way that it works for everybody. It's just, common sense sometimes gets lost, with the politics, and it's unfortunate.
Thank you so much for coming on this Sunday morning, and let's keep praying for common sense, and let's keep praying for our city and our state. Thank you so much.
I'm going to church right now to pray for it, John.
I'll be there next to you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Cats Roundtable. We'll be right back right after this break. Welcome back to the Cats Roundtable.
New Jersey, each day your beauty shines from farmland to the shore. New Jersey.
With us today is Paul Janishek, the president of the New Jersey Conservative GOP. Well, did I pronounce your name right, Paul?
Danelchik. Don't worry, the good sister.
Danelchik. Okay, I'll
Yes.
do better next time. You know, what went wrong with the GOP in New Jersey, and they lost by 14 points, and they also lost by 14 points in Virginia.
Well, I'll go over first what went right with the Chitterelli campaign. This is the first statewide candidate who really caused an excitement. Jack did great at the town hall meetings, the rallies. I would speak to him after the rallies. He was sharp. He was on target. He hit all the issues, ending sanctuary cities, getting rid of CRT, DEI, stop men and women's sports and bathrooms, all right down the line. He was great. And then toward the end, you had the media going on and on about the Trump shutdown. And I'm screaming at the TV, it's not the Trump shutdown, it's the Schumer shutdown. I was able to see through that nonsense, but unfortunately, the people didn't. And they held accountable what was happening with that shutdown to all the Republican Party candidates. Now, his opponent, you know, when they asked Jack what would he do on day one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 talking points right away. She was on a friendly show, and they asked, what would you do on your first day? She had no plan. And basically, toward the end of the campaign, there were murmurings in the Democrat Party. I think we got the wrong candidate. It was unbelievable that he would lose to such a poor campaign, to such a poor candidate. So I started analyzing what the heck happened here. You know, the night of the election, at this big ballroom, it was filled to the rafters, and there was a mile long outside, 2 abreast that couldn't get in. This was supposed to be his night. And then we found out what happened, as you said, 14 points behind, which was outrageous. So what the people did, over ad nauseum on the news, they see the traffic control agents going to soup kitchens, getting food, driving Uber, taxis and all. They said Washington workers applying for food stamps. And they showed over and over an immigrant who they thought was illegal that got arrested. They played that over and over. We were losing that vote because innocent Hispanics thought they were going to get rounded up, which wasn't so. And that's what had happened. It was a tsunami from Mississippi all the way up to Maine. We lost seats that were almost centuries Republican because of that. And they're trying the same thing again. And this new governor, we're in for a rough 4 years. I could tell you that right now, John.
Listen, I thought it was a close election, and when you lost by 14 points, I just was completely shocked.
Yeah, and what they were saying, John, we might have to wait a few days before we see the results. It's neck and neck. And what had happened, the Democrats did a number on us. And the problem, how we solve this, the Republicans have to start hitting hard. As soon as they come up with these things that misinterpret what the Republican Party's doing and distorting what they're doing. You know, when Trump ran the first time, he said, we got to get killers. I'm going to get killers in the economy like Carl Icahn. Well, the Republican Party needs some killers now to defend themselves. Johnson, our speaker, he did a phenomenal job. He was on every Sunday morning show defending what was going on, and we have to get tough. And I think maybe some new leadership in Washington. Thune as the Senate president's a nice guy. He's good. But don't you think we'd be much better with Senator Kennedy or Ted Cruz as our Senate president? And we have the same problem here in New Jersey. And, you know, I have to do my part a little more. I'm going to have to come up with some press releases when they do these things and submit it.
Paul, let me say your name right, Paul. Danelchik, president of the New Jersey Conservative GOP. Stay in touch with us, and we'll keep talking. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
The Cats Roundtable.
With us today is Jerry Schaffenberger, and he's a New Jersey assemblyman in Monmouth County. And he's got a new bill that will fix voter ID in New Jersey. What's the best way to say it? That the election is honesty and integrity?
Yeah,
Jerry?
I would say every American would be secure that their elections are fair and honest.
And you're going to do two things. You have one bill for voter ID, and talk to us about that first.
Yeah, sure. This bill would require every voter to show voter ID at the polls. And it's something that 36 states across the country have already adopted in some form, and it's worked magnificently. And we want to do the same thing here in New Jersey. And interestingly, John, there's been a poll that shows over 83% of Americans are in favor of voter ID. So that's astronomical as far as the electorate and their feelings towards a certain issue. So we have the backing of the majority of Americans, and we feel it's time that we secure our elections here in New Jersey.
Understood. And is there opposition?
There's quiet opposition, but the fact that the majority will not let this bill move forward says it all, that they're very reluctant to put this up for a vote. They don't want to be on record of voting against voter ID, so they just don't bring the bill to the floor. So we're hoping that the pressure from the public will force their hand to let it come to the floor for the full voting session. And I believe it would pass 80-0 if it was given a chance. That's how confident I am in the will of the people who want this, and the willingness of the legislators to hear what they're demanding and act upon it.
Understood. And the second bill that you're recommending is what? Tell us.
Yeah, it's to cleanse the voter rolls of ineligible voters. And what it would do, it would use a form of software called Crosscheck. And what that does, it scans all the voter rolls across the country and will pick up duplicate registrations. And you would be able to find out folks who have moved away. And in fairness, the last thing on people's minds is alerting the election board that they're moving away, so they remain registered in two different places. So you'd be able to identify which is legitimate and which is a former address. You could link it up to death certificates. So if an individual passes away, they could be taken off the voter rolls. Because with vote by mail, and you have ineligible voters on the voter roll, there's a possibility of these ballots going out to God knows where, and no one really knows where they're going to end up and who's going to come in possession of them. We hear about it all the time from constituents in my office here, saying, my mother-in-law died 5 years ago, and I just got a ballot. My kids moved out 10 years ago, and I just got a ballot. So we're trying to cleanse the voter rolls, and that would really go a long way to cleaning up the elections and making sure that ballots don't fall into the wrong hands.
And again, that some people are opposed to that, bringing it to the forefront?
Well, for the same reason as the voter ID bill, it hasn't been allowed to move forward. And it really is a common sense thing, and it protects everybody. This is not a partisan issue, John.
So tell
this
us
is really something.
We're putting you on the air. A lot of people in New Jersey are listening to you right now. What can be done?
Well, what I would like everybody to do, all your listeners, is to contact their local legislators. There's 40 districts in New Jersey, and contact them and ask them to become co-sponsors of these two bills. Now, I can give you the numbers if that's okay. Bill number A841 is the voter ID bill. Bill A846 is the bill to cleanse the voter rolls. So if we can get those two signed into law, we could really have confidence in New Jersey's elections. And I think most people would agree that they can accept the outcome of any election if they're sure it's fair and honest and above board. And these two bills will guarantee that.
Well, Jerry Schaffenberger, Assemblyman from Monmouth County, please keep us informed, and we'll talk again real soon.
I sure will. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Cats Roundtable. We'll be right back right after this break. Welcome back to the Cats Roundtable. Well, like every Sunday morning, we have Steve Cates, otherwise known as Dr. Sky. And Steve, what are you going to do to enhance our minds this morning?
Well, John, we're going to take you on the tour, not only from space, but out to the deep universe. John, we begin with another update on the Artemis NASA program to the moon. Everybody knows, at least by now, helium leaks and hydrogen leaks on the big SLS rocket have forced it to go back into the big house where they're going to try to correct it. But here's the latest information. In 2025, NASA lost some 20% of its staff due to budget cuts. So now they're going to change the lineup. So Artemis 2, which now hopefully launches in April, going around the moon with 4 astronauts. Artemis 3 was supposed to be, John, the landing on the moon. So now Artemis 3, probably in 2027, will test out systems like spacesuits, rendezvous, hopefully with a future lunar lander. And we're talking about maybe no earlier, John, than landing on the moon with humans, at least NASA, till 2028. Lots of changes with the new administrator, Mr. Isaacman, and that's basically an interesting story because they canceled out the Lunar Gateway project, which is supposed to be a space station around the moon. So let's hope they got it really refocused and on target.
What is it, like 60 years later, or?
Well, we're almost approaching that. I mean, the last landing on the moon, John, goes back, and I remember it, probably a lot of people do too, if they're in our age group, back in 1972 with Apollo 17. And people say, well, hey, and here's a question, John, that I know you and I will both be interested in trying to dig deeper. How did we do it so well back then, and how come we simply can't do it now? And their answer is really not as easy as many people would think.
Okay, let's move on. Let's hope it happens.
We got something really interesting here to let the listeners know. We've all heard about black holes. What are they in space? Something that no light, heat, or energy can escape. But people may not know, back in 1974, the great physicist Stephen Hawking, he said that black holes do not necessarily pull everything in, and that they might also have some release or escape of material. Now, that's very, very controversial, because even the classic scientist, the guy who discovered the concept of black holes, Princeton physicist John Wheeler, he stated a long time ago that black holes have no hair. What does that mean? It sounds really ridiculous, meaning they don't leak. There's nothing coming out of a black hole. But Stephen Hawking said differently, that over the course of time, there's something called Hawking radiation, John. What is that? That black holes theoretically could leak over time and pop in and out of the universe, something to watch out for if we're going to travel into the deep cosmos.
I've seen it on Star Trek.
Absolutely. Way ahead of the time of where we are now. And, John, the last one we have always is the big one. What is the big mystery of the week? And the question posed is this. What's the fastest that humans have ever traveled so far? It's interesting. Go back to May 26, 1969, when Apollo 10, the astronauts came back from their orbit around the moon. They attained a speed, John, of 24,816 miles per hour. Now, lucky for them, they came through the atmosphere and slowed down with the heat shield. But guess what? The Artemis 2, when it does launch to the moon, hopefully in April, it could break that record, coming back at over 25,000 miles per hour. They use something called a skipping technique into the atmosphere. But, John, if they skip and bounce off the atmosphere, they have to do this precisely, or else they'll skip out into space. That's amazing, John. Imagine going that fast, the fastest that humans have gone. And maybe in the future we'll find out, like Star Trek, that was just a tiny speed compared to the speed of light.
At what point, which one of our aircraft is going to do that in the future?
We're not sure, but we know from history the big Lockheed Skunk Works project, the SR-71, it was pushing Mach 3, and that's technology of the 60s. But now, allegedly, I can't prove it, we can dig deeper into the story, that we might have something called the Dark Star that goes upwards of Mach 6. A replacement, John, to the SR-71. I kind of think we got it, and I think both you and I believe that maybe we didn't just figure this technology out ourselves. Right, John?
But Dr. Sky, Steve, thank you for expanding our minds, and look forward to next week.
Always, John. Good Sunday to you and the listeners, and always remember to keep your eyes to the skies.
The Cats Roundtable.
With us today is Jesse Arm, and he's the Vice President of External Affairs for the Manhattan Institute. Jesse, we all love New York. We want New York to succeed and be successful.
I love New York so much that I'm coming here for you with new numbers, some new numbers from a new poll from the Manhattan Institute that tells us some pretty interesting things about the Democratic Party. Is the median Democratic voter actually moving to the left, or is the party being pulled to the left by a smaller activist faction that dominates elite discourse and these low turnout political elections that we have? So at the Manhattan Institute, this question has really just been plaguing us. We wanted to get down to the bottom of it, so we went out, we surveyed 2,593 respondents, people who were registered Democrats or they voted for Kamala Harris in 2024. And we also did these big oversamples of Hispanic and black voters to make sure that we're getting a statistical poll that makes sense from those constituencies, which matter a lot in the Democratic electorate. And I'll tell you, John, our findings point to a Democratic coalition today that is actually often much more moderate, much more internally divided, and much more pragmatic than what is found across listening to far-left social media or cable news or any of these donor-funded groups that propelled Zohran Mamdani here in New York City. In fact, more voters in today's Democratic coalition favor moving the Democratic Party toward the ideological center than further to the left.
There's a lot of common sense Democrats, but some of them don't have the courage to stand up. It seems like the socialist Democrats are a lot more aggressive.
Well, here's the truth, John. The Democratic coalition is best understood as three blocks. The largest block, moderates, holds about 47% of today's Democratic coalition. 47%, that's nearly half. They're moderates who hold middle-of-the-road views across many of the most contentious issues in national politics, including immigration, crime, transgender policy, and DEI. You've got a second block. It's about 37% of the Democratic coalition. These are progressive liberals, okay? These are people who describe themselves as either a liberal Democrat or a progressive Democrat. They lean left, but they remain closer to the party's sort of institutional mainstream. And then there's a third block, a significantly smaller one, coming in at about 11% of today's Democratic coalition. You could call that the woke fringe. Okay, this is the group that consistently takes maximalist positions on issues. They're disproportionately young. They're much more conspiratorial than the rest of the coalition. And they are really the ones that are motivating a hardcore left-wing pull that all of the rest of the party seems that they feel that they have to be beholden to go along with.
So where do we go?
Across issue areas, you've got a coalition whose preferences tend to reflect the structure I laid out before. On immigration, only 1 in 10 take a true open borders position. Less than 1 in 4 want to see more legal migrants come into the country. And majorities support shifting to prioritize skills-based immigration and deporting criminals. On public safety, you've got a coalition that's divided across over the criminal justice system in general, but is strongly and aggressive proponents of prosecuting gun crimes in more aggressive ways. They view the police as essential, and they reject political violence. On the transgender thing, most voters support parental notification requirements, preventing biological boys from participating in girls' sports, and age limits on medical transitions, meaning you can't do it below the age of 18. On economics, you've got a coalition that, sure, they favor the redistribution stuff, they're favoring consumer protections, but there's limited appetite for the burn-it-down politics. There's concerns about welfare fraud, and there is this new interest in actually free trade, maybe as a knee-jerk response to what Trump is doing, and some of these other kind of supply-side policies. On Israel, you've got actually most voters in the Democratic Party who do say the Jewish state has a right to exist, but younger voters are markedly less supportive and more open to anti-Semitic tolerance. And on national identity more broadly, you do have 2 in 3 Democrats who are willing to say they see America as historically a force for good in the world. So what do we do, John? I think the answer is actually fairly straightforward. You've got these activist politics who often speak for the most ideologically intense voters, but on many issues, the majority of that coalition is with the moderates, often alongside black and Hispanic voters, rather than the party's most activist faction. And the woke fringe, however, it may still exert outsized influence in these low turnout primaries and on online discourse, but it is not the median position today. And Democratic elected officials should know that. They should know that their voters want them to move toward the center, and they've got to stand up to the fringe.
Jesse Arms, let's talk again real soon.
Great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
With us today to give us a financial report for Sunday morning, we have John Terrett. Well, John, give us an update.
Good morning, John. Well, you don't need me to tell you what the big story of the week is. Of course, it was that outbreak of hostilities in the Middle East. Wall Street wonders how long it will last, what the end game is, what the outcome will be. Wall Street is not at all certain. We thought there'd be a big sell-off on Monday. There wasn't. The Dow was down. The Nasdaq, the S&P were in the green, which was pretty eye-popping for most of us on Wall Street. Tuesday, there was a big sell-off after Asia panicked overnight. Wednesday, recovery because the fundamentals of the U.S. economy are still pretty strong. We have had, up until last Friday, strong jobs growth. Inflation is coming down, and the Fed is in the mood to cut. Thursday, there was another sell-off. Friday, well, the worst week at the end of Friday since November of last year. And the problem is oil. Will Iran close the Strait of Hormuz or not? Can Iran close the Strait of Hormuz? No one knows for certain. But on Friday, WTI, the American benchmark, was up 13%. Brent, the global benchmark, was up about 9%. And this on the day when Kuwait is apparently stopping production because it has no more storage space left to store its crude oil because it can't get it out because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It's not officially closed, but shipping companies won't go through it at the moment, even though the White House is offering insurance and naval protection for vessels going forward. And it's thought that Iraq might be the next country to slow down its oil production. We shall see. Of course, we did have that job shock on Friday, which nobody was expecting. 92,000 jobs lost in the month of February, mainly because of healthcare issues. The Federal Reserve will have to deal with that when they meet a week on Tuesday. In the crypto space, the big story of the week was President Trump weighing in on the Clarity Act, urging it to get done and criticizing the banks for holding it up. Company news, Warner Discovery moving ahead with that $111 billion takeover bid by Paramount. We had earnings from Abercrombie & Fitch, from Kroger, from Costco, from CrowdStrike, and from Broadcom. And late on Friday, the German media company Axel Springer, which owns Politico, the Washington, D.C. insider website and publication, they're buying the UK's Telegraph newspaper, very famous Broad Street newspaper, for $575 million in this changing media landscape. And so to the markets, well, as I said just now, the worst week last week was since November of last year for all the reasons I've just outlined. And in the week ahead, we have earnings from the department store Kohl's. We've got a lot of inflation data next week, John. CPI, that's consumer inflation, retail sales, pretty much the same thing. And right at the end of the week, we get GDP, a look at the U.S. economy and its growth. John.
Well, thank you for the update. And you know what I said to people? I said to people on Friday, and I think I said that to Forbes magazine, I said, under President Biden, we had 4 years of oil at $80, $90, $100 a barrel. Well, I said, maybe in a month's time, the price of oil will go back down again. So you can have 4 years of President Biden or maybe just 1 month of President Trump. Have a nice weekend.
You know, one of the things that's happening on Wall Street, I think, is that people are saying to themselves, well, look, we've kind of lived through this before. The first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, there's been the COVID, there was the global financial crash, and it all kind of, comes out right in the end. I think that is part of the reason why we haven't seen a massive, massive sell-off on Wall Street this week just gone.
Thank you so much, and let's catch up again next week, and God bless America.
Thanks very much, John. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for being with us for the Cats Roundtable Local Edition, the #1 show on Sunday mornings in New York. Keep listening to us for the Cats Roundtable National Edition between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. So we'll be back to you in a few minutes after the news.
This is Greg Kelly. Donate now to Toys for Tots, which works year-round. Go to toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots supports children in need throughout the year with programs like the Toys for Tots Literacy Program. Established in 2008, it has provided over 63 million books to disadvantaged children. The Toys for Tots Literacy Program is committed to providing disadvantaged children with direct access to books and educational resources that enhance their ability to read and communicate effectively. Go to toysfortots.org.